Good morning. Welcome to this session on networking in the new world of work for women, minorities, minority women, but just marginalized groups in general. And I hope throughout the week you've been having a lot of fun learning and taking part in engaging conversations. I know I've learned so much from all the other wonderful sessions so far. So thanks for sticking with us until the last day. To introduce myself a little bit, so I'm US Song. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I joined here in St. Gallen, January this year. I'm working at the Competence Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and also for the Institute for Leadership and Human Resource Management. And I'm also part of the research lab called PLAD, which is short for the Path to Leadership for Inclusion and Diversity, which is led by Professor Dr. Jamie Bloor. I'm sure you've met her virtually or in person sometime this week. She kickstarted the week with her chat about allyship. And before delving into our topic today, a special thanks to all of our sponsors who made this possible, allowing us researchers to get out here and talk about our research and passion and connect with all of you who share the same passion and interest. So yeah, let's get into today's topic. And today's topic might be something that you're all too familiar with, and it's called networking. And just this week, during Diversity and Inclusion Week, I know we had APRO sessions at least once or twice throughout the week. And we know we take part in networking during those times of building, managing, leveraging relationships with other people, which is how we define networking in academic literature. And sometimes, depending on the group you're talking to, some researchers would say that there has to be an instrumental motive that is explicit from the beginning. So for example, you're going to be talking to some people at APRO sessions because you have an explicit motive to learn about this job opportunity or promotion opportunities, and you want information out of that person. But depending on some other research groups you talk to, some people would say, well, that instrumental motive doesn't have to be very explicit or clear from the very beginning. Maybe you just like that person you met at the APRO and you just want to continue that relationship. And somewhere down the road, there happens to be this opportunity where you can help that person and that person can also help you. So that instrumental part comes in a lot later. So to keep the definition broad, I'll leave out the instrumental motive being explicit from the definition. So what do we know what successful networking looks like and why is it important? Well, to get to why it's important, we know that successful networking is one of the key factors to having a successful career. And especially in the North American context, and also perhaps in the Swiss context, it's not surprising to see people getting job opportunities or information through their network. And I also do some research in the entrepreneurship space, and you see it all the time. Entrepreneurs engage in a lot of networking, for example, to get in touch with investors so that they can locate certain financial resources they need to fund their startups and ventures. So what does the prior literature tell us about what successful networking looks like? How can we characterize it? Well, traditionally in the prior research, we know that there are two characterizations of successful network in the professional sense. One is that if you're in a network where you're occupying the position where you're bridging between different groups that would normally not interact with each other, we say that is also a very advantageous position for you. And that's because you get different pieces of information that's embedded in different parts of the network. And by being in that brokerage position, you're getting all those different pieces of information that other groups may not have. And you can also engage in some cross-fertilization of the information, which can help you gain new insights or knowledge that other groups may not have access to. The second aspect of having a successful network And this might be something that you're familiar with from the famous work by Mark Granovetter on the power of weak ties. It's good to have a large acquaintance of diverse backgrounds rather than having a really small group of people that you're super close to. And that's because people who you are really close to are likely going to be very similar to you. So the type of information that your close friends and family, what they can give you are some pieces of information that you probably already know. So when you have diverse acquaintances who may not be super close to you necessarily, but they can be helpful professionally because they can give you non-overlapping information and resources that are scattered out there. And so what do we know how the minority or the marginalized groups are doing in terms of successful networking? Unfortunately, the literature tells us that the marginalized groups are having a lot more difficulty and challenges in building these successful networks in both of these aspects. They're less likely to occupy these positions where you're the network broker, bridging between different groups. And also, you're less likely to have a diverse array of acquaintances who will provide you with non-overlapping information. And just a quick note here, although I primarily focus on my research on gender and race, given that I am a woman of color, when I talk about marginalized groups, it doesn't necessarily have to be women or people of color. It could be different intersections of marginalization, which could be a socioeconomic class as a working class, or you have certain religions that is not appreciated in certain societies. So just making a quick note there. And so what is the current state of diversity and inclusion in networking, and how is it going to look different in the new world of work? Well, is it going to change in the new world of work? Well, the answer is partly yes and partly no. And this is because there are already some old challenges that we already know, and also there are some new changes that the marginalized groups will experience in the future with the changing trends in work. So let's get to the old challenges first. So when we talk about challenges to networking, some people might think, well, challenges to networking is not something that's unique to marginalized people, because it could be something that everyone experiences, unless they're super talented at networking because they have this extroverted personality. But when we look at the literature, we find that there are some unique challenges that marginalized individuals experience that is unique to them. And one thing that we know from the literature is that when you are a marginalized status individual, you're more likely to experience a sense of belonging uncertainty. And that means, so imagine yourself walking into this networking event and you're the only woman or you're the only person of color. It's going to be really hard for you to feel like you're at home, to feel like everyone else would appreciate you in the same way that they appreciate other people. So it means that you have this belonging uncertainty that you're constantly questioning whether you're bringing in the same value, worth that you want to bring to this group, and whether you're going to be accepted by other people. And because you're bringing in all of this emotional baggage as this marginalized group, when you're trying to engage in networking, which has some nuance of instrumental motive behind it, it's going to feel like you're being inauthentic, like you're being selfish for some reason. So at the personal level, there's already this emotional challenges, cognitive challenges that impair your capacity to engage in networking, especially with other people who are belonging to other dominant groups. And there's also the structural level where marginalized groups are systematically excluded from networking opportunities. I mean, this shouldn't be happening, but when I talk to some female professionals, they often talk about how they were excluded from golfing after work because some of their male colleagues just thought, well, she's a woman, she probably doesn't enjoy sports that much. Let's not invite her to this golfing event, but we'll invite her for something else, something that she can also enjoy. So it's actually not some malicious intent, although there is this all boys network group going on. It doesn't necessarily have to be this conscious effort to exclude marginalized groups from networking events. It could be actually done out of considerateness, like in this case. They just wanted to make sure everyone has a good time at the networking event, and they just thought because of these stereotypes and assumptions about marginalized groups, they just thought that this particular networking would not be very enjoyable to them, so they were not invited. So there is that structural exclusion going on. And also, there's the prejudice and negative stereotypes that can affect marginalized individuals more. So some research tells us that even if you belong to the same network, marginalized group individuals may not be able to leverage the network in the same way as dominant group individuals. So, for example, if as a marginalized individual, you might ask for specific information about how to negotiate salary. And you might get more generic information from the people you're talking to in your network. But on the other hand, some of your other colleagues who don't share this marginalized status, when they ask the same question, they might be getting higher quality feedback and suggestions and information that can be more helpful. And the mechanisms might differ depending on the situation, but there are studies showing that, yes, even if you belong to the same network, which is very hard for marginalized individuals, you may not be able to tap into that network effectively as some of the other people there. And so what are some of the new challenges, that marginalized individuals may experience because of the changing work trends in the future of work? Well,
I found this on the way.
Sorry. So one of the things that we notice is that, so for the future of work, compared to the past, a lot of people are going to be working multiple jobs at the same time, or they're going to be switching jobs and occupations more frequently than past generations. So we see this trend is especially strong among marginalized groups. So when we look at entrepreneurship, which is a non-traditional career path, we see a lot of uptake among women. And this is not just in Canada and the US, it's also around the world. We see a lot more attention to these marginalized groups partaking in non-traditional careers or moving from one career to another. And so when we think about the multiple changes in jobs and occupations in the future, chances are when you get to your second, third, or fourth job or occupation, chances are you might not be in the same type of profession as you were in your first job. So for example, that could mean you're going from an academic researcher to being a consultant, or you're doing a math PhD and then going to sales later on. And these are some career shifts that require not only very different skill sets, but it also means breaking into new fields, new roles and responsibilities, getting yourself into new spaces. And that also requires the help of navigating your network successfully. And according to research, when you're breaking into a new career, new field, you need to tap into your network differently compared to when you're already stable in your career. So when we look at the entrepreneurship literature, entrepreneurs at the early stages where things are still rocky, volatile, and the entrepreneurs may not necessarily have it pinned down what their exact business idea and model is, they really need to tap into their strong ties, meaning their close friends and families, to help them really overcome this rocky, volatile stages. But once they're more stable in their career, that's when the power of weak ties come in, where they can rely on different pieces of information that's coming in from acquaintances that are not necessarily close to you, and you can take advantage of that better. So if you're doing this career shift multiple times, then it means that you need to be a bit more flexible with the network that you build, and also the part of the network that you're tapping into. And we already know that networking is already a bigger challenge for the marginalized individuals. And the fact that you have to renew this process multiple times is going to add on to this challenge for marginalized individuals. And also, we know that from the chat yesterday, led by Magdalena and Stefan, about flexible work arrangements, it seems like it's here to stay. And although some employers may not like it necessarily with this trend of more flexibility in where and when you work, it seems that across all the major economies, it's a work arrangement that seems to be favored by a lot of employees. And we know that during COVID, this pandemic had a greater impact on women who were more negatively impacted by this pandemic in terms of their career and professional development. And one big reason is that women tend to take up a lot more of the cognitive and the mental load of unpaid domestic labor. And this might be even harder for women with other intersecting marginalized identities, such as women of color or migrant women who may have less resources to draw on that social support. But so women's productivity was deeply impacted during COVID because women were finding themselves working everywhere all the time when they were given the choice to work anywhere flexibly in the temporal and spatial sense, because they were not only taking up the paid labor work, but also doing more of the unpaid domestic labor. So this leaves even less and less time, which is an important resource that you need to spend in developing and maintaining your network. So why does D&I and networking matter for the future of work? Why should companies care about it at all? Leaders, managers, and organizations. Well, one obvious reason is social responsibility. We already know that networking is a key factor for career success. So if we have inequality in networking, it means that there's also inequality in the overall workforce in the company, especially in who succeeds and goes up that hierarchical ladder and who doesn't. And there's more and more demand from various stakeholders for companies to create a more equitable workplace environment. So for example, we know that NASDAQ, starting in 2022, they have this new board diversity rule where all the companies that are publicly listed, they're expected to have at least one diverse director, and NASDAQ has its own diversity matrix to show which check marks you need to have. And the deadline is 2023, next year. I mean, this year. And for larger companies, they have a little bit of a more leeway with the time, but it's still in 2 years in 2025, they have to have at least 2 diverse directors on their board. And also the UK already did this a lot earlier in 2018. Companies with 250 or more employees, they have to report their gender pay gap data openly. So we're already seeing this trend that they want companies to be more diverse and inclusive in their workplace. And one way to get at that is to break down that inequality in networking that's going on within the organizations. And secondly, the employee experience is also something that is surfacing as an important factor. Did you know that Europe is leading in the quiet quitting trend, which basically means that employees are dissatisfied with their workplace, so they're disengaging. They're only putting in the minimum effort required not to get fired. And while there are multiple aspects that are involved to enhance employee experience, one thing that comes up as a common thread is that employees want a workplace where they feel more connected and integrated into the community. So it doesn't necessarily mean they all want to come back in person and have coffee chats all the time, but they do want to work at an environment where they feel like they have meaningful connections. And still, we're seeing this vertical and horizontal segregation in networking activities and interaction in general at workplaces, which makes it difficult for people to feel connected when they have these glass partitions amongst themselves. So breaking down these glass partitions can also be a way to help employees feel more connected. And finally, although making the business case for diversity and inclusion is not the best way to go in some cases, but here I also want to emphasize that breaking down the inequality in networking may be also one way to boost the innovative and creative output of organizations. We have unprecedented automation going on with the rise of technology. And we know that the team performance is going to rely more on the innovative and creative part rather than the rote labor aspect that can be replaced by machines. And one way to harness this underlying creativity and innovation is to take advantage of the collective intelligence. So we talked a little about why the network brokerage position is helpful and advantageous. It's because you can cross-fertilize different pieces of information that can help you gain new insights, which can also help boost innovation and creativity. So if employees are occupying these network positions where they can be at the position to cross-fertilize different pieces of information, for them to gain new insights and new opportunities, it could be also a way to take advantage of that collective intelligence more effectively. So overall, I want to say that there are 3 key reasons why everyone should care about D&I in networking, especially for the future. One is by breaking down the inequality in networking, you can fulfill your social responsibility to create this equitable workplace. And second, you can enhance employee experience, helping people feel more connected in meaningful ways. And 3, it can also be a potential driver for innovation and creativity. So, what can we do? So, I don't want to put all the burden of D&I on the individual, but it's also good to know as marginalized individuals, what can you do in the meantime to really jumpstart your network, building it and maintaining it, while we chip away at improving the structural inequality. And I'm drawing on this wonderful Harvard Business Review piece written by Roberts and Mayo, and they talk about 6 actionable steps that marginalized individuals, underrepresented groups can take to effectively manage their networks. And although they put the emphasis on marginalized and underrepresented, it can be strategies that works well for everyone, for people belonging to the dominant group as well, if they have been struggling with network. And the first step is to tap into your dormant connections. And by dormant connections, I'm sure you've all had this experience where at one point in time you were very close colleagues or friends with some people, and then for some reason, maybe you changed your job, maybe you moved to a different department, or even to a new city or country, and these connections fall through because you don't have as much opportunities to keep in touch with them. So one way to kind of get back to your networking is to tap into your dormant connections. Just let them know they're still on your radar, that you still care about them. And social media has made it a lot easier to do this. You can just send a quick message or just write a quick comment. If you see a LinkedIn post with your old-time friend celebrating something, just these small gestures can go a long way. And research shows that tapping into your dormant connections can actually be a powerful way to leverage your network as well. And this can be helpful for marginalized individuals, especially if they feel inauthentic about networking because they're already bringing in this emotional baggage of belonging uncertainty. It could be helpful to hedge against that because here you're just trying to get back into your network and just let them know that you care about them still. And the second way to expand network is to participate in learning communities. And this is helpful because from the get-go, you already have a common ground that you're there to learn something new. And the learning communities necessarily don't have to be a long-term commitment. It can be something that's more short-term program. I know St. Gallen has various wonderful programs like women in leadership programs or conferences. So if you're interested in honing up your leadership skills, you can just join these learning communities for a few days where you can connect with other like-minded individuals. And perhaps some of those will be embedded into your network in the long run as well. And third, reaching out to your champions and sponsors from time to time, especially as a marginalized individual, can be an important way to continue growing your network and maintaining, doing that maintenance work. And Jamie and Eugenia talked about the importance of allyship earlier this week. And that's because having those people in your corner who really understand your challenges and willing to help you out and support you, it's a very valuable thing to have, especially given the negative stereotypes you may have against you. And by reaching out to these champions and sponsors and mentors who have in some ways let go of these negative stereotypes against you, they might be able to also help you introduce you to other people in their networks to continue growing and building your network. And so one way to do that could be you can have perhaps monthly coffee chats scheduled with your champions and sponsors just to make sure you keep in contact with them. And fourth, networking through community service. And when you're doing meaningful work, value-based work like community service, volunteering, and giving back to society, it can be helpful for marginalized individuals to also hedge against that negative stereotype or even feeling selfish because you're trying to be in some ways instrumental by leveraging your network. And by having these value-based shared interests in this group, you can hedge against these negative emotions and hesitance and concerns of being seen as too selfish because you're doing good for society. So that could be another way to meet new people and stay in contact and maintain them. And also you can focus on shared networks. And if you don't have shared networks, you can try an organized group networking. So there are multiple opportunities. I think there's women alumni associations and leadership groups for people of color or migrants. And these could be valuable networks where you already have a shared sense of identity. And these could be really powerful, safe spaces where you can discuss your own challenges at work and get some actionable advice, suggestions, and help on how to navigate that. Because these are the people who already share the challenges that you're facing. And finally, the sixth step that you can take is to take advantage of remote resources. And I know that remote networking opportunities are likely not going to replace all of the in-person networking opportunities, because there's definitely value in in-person meetups. But if you're so constrained with time and space, perhaps it could be a quick way to meet new people or get in touch if you have remote coffee chats in your workplace. If it's virtual, you can still take advantage of staying in the loop with these people. So these are the 6 steps that Roberts and Mayo have outlined in their wonderful HBR piece. And I also wanted to share some ongoing exciting research findings. If we have time, we can talk a little bit more. I have the pleasure of organizing a symposium at the Academy of Management to talk about how minorities, underrepresented or marginalized individuals can network effectively, or what dominant groups can do to enhance the diversity and inclusion in networking. And there were some emerging interesting insights, but I want to leave some time for people to ask questions or have some discussion towards the end. So I'll skip over to the takeaways for leaders, managers, organizations seeking to improve D&I and networking. And the first obvious thing is make sure everybody's invited. This is very obvious, but make sure that the kind of assumptions that you have for other people, even if it's out of good concerns and good intentions, still please extend the invitation. And one way to help the organization stay sensitized to whether their networking activities are indeed diverse and inclusive is to promote allyship at workplace, so that you know already you have some antenna out there to know what the marginalized individuals need and what they want from networking activities, so that they can also participate and enjoy. And lastly, it's also an easy way to improve D&I and networking would be to actually get feedback. If you hold networking events and you're interested in improving the diversity and inclusion, just reach out to the marginalized groups who have participated or who haven't participated to ask why they didn't join the networking event, or if they have, in what ways the event can be improved. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I would be keen on learning about what kind of questions, comments you have, or whether you have some resources for networking that you would love to share. Just put it up in the chat. Or if you think of something later, just feel free to reach out later too. So yeah, I'll leave the last 9-10 minutes for the group.
Yeah, I wanted to share that sometimes it's useful to really put our networks on a paper, right? To maybe make some drawing and say, okay, these are my strong networks, these are my weak networks, these are my dormant ones. And I love the sloth picture there, Mia. And I think that, yes, maybe doing that exercise just this afternoon can be useful to leverage our networking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just thinking of this one example. I was at this wonderful women's leadership network back in Canada, and they had this requirement that everyone has to have a name card with their name, of course, and one thing that they can offer help on. So, for example, I am an expert in X, Y, and Z. I can offer coffee chats about this topic, but they also have to have written on their name card one ask. So, what kind of help do they want from other people who are joining in that networking event? And a lot of the participants were saying that, yeah, it was really helpful because I feel hesitant about reaching out to other people because I don't know what they need. I don't know what I can offer help as. But because we had these name cards, it was a lot easier to strike up conversations and build the network. So, and that was also from a feedback session about how to make diverse and inclusive networking events. So yeah, that's also something that I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, maybe one idea to incorporate in the next DNI week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, to put in our cards.
Yeah, I can also talk about the networking symposium a little bit more. One thing that I found super fascinating, and I think Tatiana Lewand and Gianluca Carnabucci at ESMT Berlin, they're still working on this, finding interesting stuff continuously, is that framing the networking differently can also be a way to help marginalized individuals do networking better. We tend to think about like networking in more masculine terms. One participant told me, yeah, networking, isn't it like men in suit and tie schmoozing around with cocktails? But when you talk about networking as, no, you're building genuine connections with other people that you share passion and interest with. Yeah, that could be one way to hedge against, am I being too selfish? Am I being manipulative and using other people? So yeah, just framing it in different terms can also be a helpful way to help everyone stay more engaged with networking in more authentic ways. And I thought that was super fascinating. And another work that's led by Jamie and Eugenia and I are also part of is non-traditional networking opportunities such as sports can also be a great way to build and expand your network, because when people are having fun, when it comes to interacting with other people, you may not care as much about their social status and what their values might be and the negative stereotypes you might have against these people. So seeking out these non-traditional events that may not necessarily be under the purpose explicitly for networking, these could be great opportunities to make these authentic connections as well. And we're still working on that paper, but yeah, it's also something that I find really interesting, and hopefully we make more progress in the coming months.